maybe not quite close enough. There we go. Welcome to the first meeting of the Management Plans Work Group Industrial Subgroup. My name is Natalie Mast. I am the program manager that works on management plans here at ADWR, and we'll have a pretty good agenda here today, so let's go ahead and get started. Just a few housekeeping things before I do start. We don't have defined membership or anything like that for this group, so anyone is welcome to sit at the table. We have microphones at the table. We also have a webinar running today, so if you're going to ask any questions, make any comments, we would ask that you would please speak into a microphone so that the participants on the webinar can hear you. So if that means moving to the table, that would be great. Or for those of you in the back of the room, we do have a handheld microphone available in the back of the room, so just raise your hand and someone can bring you that microphone for the back of the room. Also, since we do have a webinar running, we'd appreciate it if you would just state your name before you make any comments, just so the participants on the webinar know who they're hearing from. All right. So as I said, my name is Natalie Mast. I work on management plans here at ADWR. I have here with me Nolan Power, who is our industrial planner in the AMAs at ADWR, and also at the table here with us is Enof Henningsen, who is the AMA director. So we'll be running through just a really brief overview of what the industrial conservation programs look like today and what the different subsectors are in that program, and then give just a brief overview of some of the ways we've looked at the industrial program data in the past. We are hoping to learn from all of you guys. So this process is intended to be open, collaborative. We are here really to learn from the water users in this sector. We are here because we know that you all live and breathe this stuff all day, every day. And we're hoping to really learn from you and better understand how we can analyze this data and interpret this data in a way that helps us move these programs into the 5th management plan. So for a little bit of background for people who may have missed the first full work group meetings, the main statute that we're working under indicates that we should have a management plan for each of 5 management periods for each AMA. And the conservation programs in those management plans should be designed to reduce withdrawals of groundwater. So this last line here, achieve reductions in withdrawals of groundwater, that's kind of our guiding principle here. If any changes, any things we talk about associated with the management plans, for the 5th management plan, we have kind of all the things on the table. We're wide open in the types of things that we can develop through this group, through this process, but this is our guiding principle, and anything we need to talk about really does need to check this box of reducing withdrawals of groundwater. So we have also heard some confusion, some feedback about pace and timeline with both the 4th and 5th management plans, so I did want to take a second to clarify that just a little bit. The department is working to adopt the remaining 4th management plans in the next 2 years. So kind of concurrently with that, we wanted to start some of the research process associated with the 5th management plans. So we're right at the beginning here. We are right at the beginning of what we intend will be a long process of research and outreach and stakeholder input on the 5th management plan. Our first task here is data analysis, looking into the data, understanding the data we have, understanding whether we need additional data in order to better understand what our next steps for the 5th management plans might be. So with that, I will hand you off to Nolan, and he'll walk you through some of the details of those conservation programs.
Thanks, Natalie. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Like Natalie said, my name is Nolan Power. I'm the new industrial conservation planner. And as she hit before, the guiding principle throughout this process is going to be exploring ways to reduce groundwater withdrawals. And we invited you all here so we can communicate with you guys and participate with you and find ways to collaborate towards this goal. The entire program with all of its subsectors was developed out of a minimal statutory framework. There haven't been many major changes or adjustments over the years so far. Before I get into the details of the program, I would like to review the department's definition of industrial user so we know who is affected by these requirements. In order to be considered an industrial user by the department, you must use water for a non-agricultural use and get that water from a non-municipal source. So a golf course using its own wells and water rights would be a good example of industrial user. I point this out because many facilities in the AMA, such as golf courses, receive water from a water provider and are actually regulated under the Municipal Conservation Program and not the Industrial Conservation Program. There is some crossover between the two programs, but I think that it is an important distinction to make. There is a statutory structure, but the statutes aren't that specific when it comes to the industrial program. Again, keep in mind that the purpose of the industrial conservation program is to move the industrial users within the AMA to the greatest level of efficiency given the latest commercially available conservation technology consistent with reasonable economic return. These requirements are contained in Chapter 6 and are broken into general requirements and the specific subsectors, each of which has its own requirements. The goal is to analyze existing conservation programs and to assess where there is room for improvements or how new programs might be developed. Now let's take a look at the general conservation requirements. At the very least, all industrial users within the AMAs must meet the following requirements. Avoid waste and try to recycle. Avoid single-pass cooling and heating unless reusing water. And then avoid using single-pass cooling, heating unless reusing water. And then use low-flow plumbing fixtures where usable. And also low-water use plant list that we have as well. Now let's take a look. In addition to these requirements, if your water falls within one of these categories, additional conservation requirements may apply. These include specific details relevant to the subsector for conservation measurements and reporting requirements. Any questions on that? And then reporting requirements. Some data quality is better than others, but it's what we have to work with and analyze these programs. We're going to try and improve data quality through audits and instituting new requirements, such as requiring data, turfed acreage, water surface, stuff we need for calculating the use. This page is just kind of how we look at the data. This is use by source is one of our common ways we break out water use with time along the x-axis and the amount along the y-axis. So this is for the AMAs. Oh, and then, so the big one on the bottom is groundwater. Orange is effluent. The gray in there is CAP, and then the surface water is in yellow. And then up top, there's a very tiny slither of other. And then another one that we commonly use is by subsector, and we use this as an intro into ways we look at data in the past. So we haven't done really extensive analysis on whether these are effective, so kind of putting it up here and seeing what you guys want to see up here, how you want just to look, and that type of thing. So, and with that, I'll switch over to Natalie once again.
Thanks, Nolan. Get this close enough. Okay. So a lot of what we wanted to do with this first meeting, the kind of beginning of this subgroup, is to start to get a feeling from all of you guys on how we might approach this data. So you can see on the screen here, we're focusing on the 5th management plans, and our first kind of goal under the work group is to assess the existing conservation programs. So how can we use data either that ADWR has or other data that might be out there to better understand whether these conservation programs are effective or whether they are the right structure for moving these conservation programs into the 5th management plan. We do hope to be transparent about this analysis, about this data that we'll be using. So the analysis as a part of this subgroup, as a part of the management plans work group, is going to be published in a conservation progress report. This is a report that ADWR intends to publish periodically, but also will publish before we start drafting the 5th management plans, in order to better communicate what we find through this data analysis, and in order to better communicate the progress of each AMA toward its goal. So here's where I would like to open it up to you all. We're looking for feedback. We're looking for ideas. There's a lot of different categories in this subsector. There's a lot of different, or in this sector, there's a lot of different ways to look at this data, and some of the ways to look at the data maybe we haven't done in the past. Maybe we haven't done as thorough of analysis of this information as we could. So what is our starting point? What are the ways that we look at this data to help us best understand whether these conservation programs are effective? Do we need additional data? Should it just be the data that ADWR has and gets reported to it? Or are there other sources of academic data or other data out there that we could pull from in order to better understand water use under these subsectors? So I would be glad to take any comments from the group if there are any.
Paradise Valley Country Club. Do you know the data that you have is accurate? I guess that'd be a good starting point.
Sure. So some of our data is better than others. So we know that in some parts of our data, things don't necessarily get updated over time. So there's some pieces of the information that we have that we think may be out of date or might not be the most accurate. We tend to believe that the water use information is pretty good, but there's other components to items that are reported, acreage numbers and that kind of thing, that aren't necessarily the most accurate. Sorry, can you just say your name before?
Yeah, Jeff Spangler with Troon Golf. Natalie, what's the scientific basis behind the water allocations on the third management plan?
Sure. So so Jeff is specifically from the golf industry. So just to clarify a little bit here, for turf application rates, there's a couple different components that go into that. For turf-related facilities, there are a couple components that go into the conservation allotments for that subsector. The turf allocation, or the turf application rate, excuse me, there's a lot of these words that are kind of similar. The turf application rate specifically was calculated previously based on the consumptive use of Bermuda grass, and calculated using under the 3rd management plan was calculated using a 75% irrigation efficiency.
Paul Brown, am I on? Paul Brown, University of Arizona. In relation to that concern, we've spent nearly 30 years working on turf water requirements down in Tucson. And as you've mentioned, the original turf duty does not include water allocated for overseeded turf, which is really the turf that makes the money. So I think from my perspective, as you go forward to the 5th management plan, they ought to have a proper consumptive use for turf grass, and then see how you make adjustments if you have goals that you need to accomplish. If you do not make these adjustments and they continue to cut that industry, I think you're going to eliminate a significant amount of overseeded turf, which, as I said, is an important from the economics of that industry.
Rory Van Pocky, Apache Sun Golf Club. One thing we're doing in the golf industry right now is we're going to be doing a survey within ourselves with golf courses in the Phoenix AMA to make sure we have the most up-to-date in real numbers. And I just wanted to pass that along to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rory. definitely be interested in seeing that information if you'd be willing to share.
I'm Mike Pierce, McGuire Pearson Story. I had a comment, I think on Nolan's reference to the definition of industrial user as somebody that does not receive municipal water supply. At least in the turf-related golf course industry, that conservation requirement for a golf course turf-related facility is often incorporated in service agreements by the municipal provider as the maximum or with some significant penalty by exceeding that maximum. And the municipal provider also has the opportunity to list that facility as an independent provider and have their own conservation requirement separated from the municipal. So if the definition you gave is technically accurate, but in the real world, I think it's a much broader category, particularly for the golf course industry, which tends to be centered in, municipal type environments. So.
Sure. And that's a good clarification. If the official definition lists not being provided by a municipal provider, but if a golf course, for example, is served by a municipal provider, then the municipal provider may be responsible for those kind of subsector requirements.
Are you done, Mike?
No, I'm done. Go ahead.
Okay. Rob Anderson, Fenimore Craig here for Robeson Communities. I have two questions. The first relates to has the department done any evaluation of the ability of the turf sector to actually meet the conservation requirements of the third management plan?
Sure. So we have done some analysis. I don't have those numbers here with me today. We have done some analysis of both current compliance with those requirements and compliance under some of the proposed changes that we have laid out for the fourth management plan. And it's a mixed bag, to be totally honest. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I don't want to quote those numbers. We're still kind of digging into that. But there are some facilities that are in compliance. There are some that are not. So it's certainly something we can look into. I think there's opportunity in the fifth management plan to maybe reconsider the structure of what those requirements look like and make sure that it's something that is both workable for the industry while also kind of checking that box that I mentioned earlier of reducing withdrawals of groundwater.
Okay, thank you. The second question relates to climate change, basically the longer growing season that I think we're experiencing. Have we done any? My recollection is that and this is going to date me, but that these golf course requirements, Paul had mentioned 30 years. I think they came in the first management plan. They were changed a little bit for the second management plan, but basically we're dealing with numbers that were probably calculated in the 1980s. For the most part, have we done any analysis of the longer growing season and the effect of that on ability to comply?
So I think that's something that we're open to looking into more associated with the fifth management plans. You're absolutely right that this particular application rate was calculated under the second management plan. So the department has reached out to a number of different entities looking for updated consumptive use type numbers and have had limited success in finding updates to those numbers. So if there are data sources out there, we would certainly be interested in seeing those, yes.
Rory Van Pocky, Apache Sun Golf Club. Economic data, we have produced an economic impact study we did 4 years ago. We can get you another report again. I believe you already have it on record, but the economic impact of our industry is important. It's almost $4 billion in economic impact, almost 42,000 jobs. These are numbers that I think are very important to our tourism and our industry, and as Governor Ducey has said, tourism is an important cog of our economy in Arizona. So I think I wanted to make sure that if you need another report from us, we'll produce it for you. Thank you.
Hi, Jeff Spangler with Troon Golf. Natalie, if the goal is groundwater savings, under the new management plans, will all other water sources be treated the same? So if there's a restriction or a change in allocation of groundwater, will all other water sources also receive those same restrictions and allocations?
So that's kind of why we're here. If that's a proposal that would be out there, that's certainly something we can consider as a part of this subgroup. Currently, effluent is given a little bit of a kind of a bonus, if you will, where effluent doesn't get counted the same as other types of water, and maybe we could consider treating other sources of water differently. Any questions? I can switch back to any slides that we had up. So the example slides that we had up on the screen earlier, I can actually go back. What we kind of have displayed here is showing how we typically look at this information. We can break this type of thing down further by subsector. You all have already brought up a couple other options for additional analyses that might be productive for this group. Are there additional data sources that we should be considering? Are there, outside of subsector and total water use, are there additional ways that we should be looking at kind of the water use information associated with each of these subsectors? And maybe to clarify those subsectors, I can switch. It was this one. So we have a number of different subsectors, and maybe each subsector needs a slightly different approach to understanding its water use. We've talked a little bit about turf here. Do we have any other ideas on any of the other sectors or any additional ideas on turf? So what we're kind of looking for here is a way to consider effectiveness of these programs so far. So we say that our goal is reducing withdrawals of groundwater. If we're considering that in the context of power plants or dairy or still turf for that matter, are there additional ways that we can analyze the existing use, the existing conservation programs to see whether they've been effective? Or whether there are ways that we should be considering changing them. We're certainly open to many different types of ideas from you all, both in this meeting and afterwards. But that's kind of what we're trying to feel out as a beginning to this process, is thinking about these conservation programs and thinking about the ways we can better understand whether they are moving the AMAs toward meeting their goals.
Excuse me. I don't know why. It doesn't sound like it's working. This is Paul Brown from University of Arizona. Given that by 2025 we're supposed to be at safe yield, as I understand the original law, what exactly are the amounts or percentages that need to be accomplished in reduction to groundwater to reach those goals? Because that, I think, would greatly help this group come to some conclusions.
Sure. So we are going to be discussing safe yield as a part of a different subgroup. What I might clarify there is that the original goal of safe yield for 4 out of those 5 AMAs was that we should attempt to achieve safe yield balance between withdrawals and recharge of groundwater. So the goals were not a prescriptive volumetric thing. What we try to do under the management plan to get closer to safe yield is make reasonable reductions over time. The management plans were intended to be incremental, so that's what we're looking at with this 5th management plan, is what is that next incremental step we can take toward reducing withdrawals of groundwater in order to contribute toward safe yield. Okay, so if there's not any other comments or questions, we can move on kind of to the next section here. I would like to say, though, that we are open to hearing feedback, yes, in this meeting, but also we have an email address set up specifically for questions and feedback related to the management plans. That email address is managementplans@azwater.gov. So what I will pull up next is, again, a little bit more of the logistics side for these meetings. We are hoping for a collaborative process here. We want to hear from you all and learn from you in how we best, yes, analyze these programs, but also in how we best move forward in this process of developing these programs for the 5th management plan. So we'd like to hear your input on what that process should look like. We are open to having conversation about how frequently this group should meet, if there's additional topics we should be considering for this sector specifically, since there's so many subsectors. How is it best to kind of divvy up the conversation around each of those subsectors? Is it worth having a breakout group of some sort to focus on turf, for example, where we know there's going to be a lot of conversation? Or do we want to kind of keep everything in this group and maybe have a series of meetings, each one focusing on a different subsector? We are open to suggestions regarding how we structure those conversations, and we'd like to hear from you guys and see if there are any preferences.
Rory Van Pocky, Apache Sun Golf Club. I think a smaller subgroups like turf-related golf courses would be good because each sector has their own challenges and different needs. So I think I would suggest smaller subgroups.
I just agree with that comment. I think it would make a sense to break out. Obviously, when you have these meetings, to the extent people want to track what's going on, they can come to any of the meetings. So it's not a true compartmentalization. But when if you can focus on a single industry, that makes a lot of sense.
Anybody else? Do we have any thoughts on how frequently that group would meet if we were going to have a turf group meet? Is there a preference on meeting time, when they would meet first, that kind of thing?
Can we get back to you on that? We'll have to
Sure.
talk a little bit, yeah. But I think so. We'll present something to you and see if that works for you, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so I think what we will probably do is have at least maybe one or two kind of these. I don't want to call it a subgroup. That seems terrible. But we can figure out what to call that group. I think we'll probably need to do that at least for turf. There may be another subsector that we would want to split out and kind of have some separate conversations about. But I think largely for this full subgroup, we could also at the same time do a series of meetings which focuses on one or two subsectors at a time while those kind of breakout groups are going on as well. All right. So what we will do is ADWR will do some work internally to assess whether we have the information we need. We will kind of figure out timing for next steps, what our next steps are, and we can send a follow-up email with additional details regarding future meetings. We, again, are really hoping that this can be an open collaborative process. If there is additional data or additional kind of directions we should go with this analysis, we would really appreciate having that kind of conversation, that feedback with you all. But if there are no other questions, was there another question?
Paul Brown, this thing makes noise, but I don't think it's being recorded. Since the turf sector is split across the municipal and the industrial, how does that communication pass back and forth?
So the conservation requirements for turf kind of live under the industrial conservation programs, if you will. So if there is a municipal provider that is serving a turf facility, they just comply with the program as written under the industrial chapter.
There's no intention of changing. That's the way it's written now in the plans. There's no intention of changing that relationship, so that whatever's set in the industrial plan will transfer to those involved with municipal.
Right. I think for simplicity's sake, we would maintain that. Any other questions? Any other comments? Okay. Well, with that, we can end a little early. Thank you all for your interest, for your participation. We do appreciate you all being here. Please reach out to us if you have any questions. That email again is managementplans@azwater.gov. Thank you.